Thank you all for being here tonight. We have some new faces, and I'm most grateful for that. And we're continuing in our program of near-death experiences. And last week we lost the sound, and it was not available to people at home. But I think this week we have it pretty well in line. And thank you. And I think that what I'm going to do briefly is review some of the main things we covered last week that might have been missed as far as the program was concerned. But I went to a couple of different sources today or this week, looking up the definition. I have used IAN's International Association for Near-Death Studies. I worked with them for two or 3 years in providing programs such as this, helping them develop slides, this kind of thing. And they have on their website all kind of definitions, information. And then the other website that's really very good is Jeffrey Long and his wife have a website. They have probably 5,000 NDEs on there that you can read. And he does a very thorough job in the sense that it's just not listing the near-death experience, but basically what he does is he goes through and asks these people questions in regard to their near-death experience. So they have to answer these questions. Did it feel real to you? Was it just kind of surreal? Did you have this experience with other people involved? And so he does a very thorough examination of the near-death experiences, and I trust him very much. He's a doctor. His wife's an attorney. He has this nice website, and as I say, and he'll tell you this may be fabricated. It may be, what do we call it, paintbrushed or brushed over or whatever. And so this kind of thing is you get this. But people have these, and as I say, we're going to see the numbers tonight. But I went to Psychology Today, and they list the near-death experience as simply an experience that a person has while in a physical state. And they don't describe that state except that it's a risk of death. And of course, we saw last week that actually in a near-death experience, there's no probability about death. Most people that have a near-death experience suffer from cardiac arrest. And basically what happens, they are clinically dead. They are clinically dead. There's no breathing, there's no heartbeat, there's no pulse. And when we look at them, and they are resuscitated, and I've got a real good video tonight, which is very, very powerful. 2 of them that are very, very powerful. I think that you'll enjoy YouTube's. And these people are resuscitated, and during this time of this absence from this world's time, they're dead, clinically dead. They have this experience. We think it's this time. No one has actually come along and put an MRI or any kind of headset on the person to see that are dying to see how the brain operates during this time. We know the brain operates, we know it functions and so forth, but it's too cruel to try to take somebody who's dying and say, we want to experiment with you, So basically, so Psychology Today attacks it from this point. And then I went to a science magazine, and they define near-death experience as a profound psychological event. It ranks in the ranks of what this person experiences at the time of the death, which typically occurs in people close to death. And as Sam Parnia, you saw him speak on the Oz show, he is big on resuscitation. He has his doctorate in, he's a medical doctor, but he also has his doctorate in cell biology. And he says death is a process. It's not black and white. The body slowly dies, and if the body slowly dies, we can take measures to lengthen that out if we can bring them back to life. And he's done that. He's big on CPR, and he says that CPR depends on what zip code you live in, whether you're going to make it or not, because he says the zip code is how effective people are in CPR. If they're very good at it, you might survive if you have a cardiac arrest and you want to be resuscitated. But this is what happens. And so they have a mystical, psychological experience, according to the science periodical, and they have intense physical and emotional pain. But it also may happen after heart attacks or traumatic brain injuries, or even during meditation. Dr. Mario Beauregard, he is a psychologist, neurologist out at the University of Arizona, out in Tucson. And he's done a couple of studies on brain what he calls brain wars and what happens in the brain during the near-death experience and this type of thing. And he studies the brain. He's got it all located where we have this happen and where that happens in the brain. If we see something, we hear something, and however the brain reacts. He's done tremendous studies of that. Done a tremendous amount of study with nuns, too, in their meditation, as far as when they're in their science. So Science Alert has put us in this loss of consciousness. And we saw basically that people who are in automobile accidents, people who drown, people who experience electrocution, all of these things can produce this cardiac arrest. It's different from a heart attack. Heart attack is a little different. Heart attack is a plumbing problem. You have one of your tubes stopped up, and they can clarify that. Cardiac arrest is over with. It's an electrical problem that takes place, and most of us will have cardiac arrest as we go along this way. So that's basically what happens is these people have this cardiac arrest, and they are revived and resuscitated and then come back and tell us these stories. And as I told you last week, it's a very controversial topic because how do you prove that this really happened? How do they? All you're doing, going by, is their word for it. I mean, that's basically it. But we're going to see tonight there's another method that's being used that is very, very interesting and also solidifies what they're telling us. And so this is the subject back in the 70s was very, very skeptical. Today we're seeing even scientific people make progress in really accepting this whole concept of a near-death experience. And people experiencing these mystical feelings. What did they experience? Well, some of them say they went through a tunnel. Some said they went to stairways. Some of them have out-of-body experiences. They're up here floating around. And they're looking down and they're seeing somebody resuscitate them. And how do we know that? Because they tell us that. And what do they tell us? They say, well, the doctor had on one red sock and one blue sock. And you know what? He did. Well, how did you know that? Well, I saw him. Well, what did the doctor say? Well, he said such and such and such and such and such and such. So this is what is called a veridical experience. And we're going to look at those tonight. I've got some interesting stories on the veridical experience of people that have actually gone through their death, come back, and have been up looking down at people as this out-of-body experience is concerned. They encounter other beings. It could be angels. Children especially see angels. They also see a lot of animals. And there are a lot of children that have NDEs, near-death experiences, drowning, automobile accidents, whatever. And they have a simple way of putting things, and it's quite interesting. They see a bright light. There's a bright light most of them see. We saw Pam Reynolds last week. Some of you missed the Pam Reynolds show. It's a landmark case. Pam was a singer in Atlanta, and she had a brain aneurysm. And in order to take care of this brain aneurysm, she went to Phoenix, Arizona, to a Dr. Spitzler out there who was very versed in this. And he had to drain her head, basically of all the blood, in order to cut the aneurysm and to restore her back to life. And during that time, she was under the anesthesia. She had a near-death experience. She heard what they were talking about. And of course, those of you who remember the video we saw, that the doctor was very insistent. Dr. Spitzer, he says, I can't explain it. I don't know how it happened. She heard somebody say, well, I can't get into the veins in her right leg. And he said, well, try her left. And she heard that. And she had an experience with her grandfather who had taught her to play the guitar. And she's talked with him and finally came back and was able to explain this. Dr. Spitzer made it perfectly clear that there's no way. She said she described the saw that they did to cut her head open. And as Dr. Spitzer emphasized, there's no way she could have known what this saw was like because everything's covered when you come into the operating theater. And the same thing with all the other instruments that are setting up. If you've had surgery, had knee surgery here and there, you go into the surgery in the operating room, you don't see anything. You're lucky to find the surgeon, but but anyway, he comes in and he does operates on you, and you don't. I had a robotic surgery. I never saw the machine that they cut with me on. So this is what the doctor tried to emphasize. That it's very hard for her to have seen these things, which The naysayers would say, well, she saw him, she heard about it, somebody told her this, but he was emphasizing very emphatically. And of course, he said at the end, he said, I don't know how these things happen. And science can't explain it. We can't explain it. It's a very, very controversial type thing. We can explain it from the religious standpoint, that this consciousness that leaves the body is our soul, and it goes to another place and it experiences these experiences and has these experiences, and then comes back and reunites with the body. But to say that, as a scientist would say, that no, the brain is a physical substance, and when you die, the brain dies. So there's no such thing as consciousness left with you. Consciousness goes, it's dead, it's all eternal oblivion. There's no afterlife. They visit with deceased relatives and friends, and it's always deceased relatives and friends. It's never the living. It's always deceased relatives and friends. And many times we've seen in studying these near-death experiences that people who are under the strain and the stress, maybe in the hospital, that they may not have known a relative has died. And the family is trying to keep this from them because they're under traumatic experience here. So what happens is they don't know that Mary has died, her great aunt or her aunt. And she meets this person in this land beyond, in this experience she's having. And she finds out then that she's dead. I don't know if you saw the movie Heaven is for Real, the little Burpo boy out in Texas, I believe it was, Arizona, out west somewhere, where he met his sister. He didn't know he had a sister, but his mother had a miscarriage, and this sister was up there, and he met her. And he talks about it. He tells about all the things that happened with his sister. And so these are the things that these people experience. And the only thing we have is anecdotal information from them that they telling us this. You can't put that in a test tube. You can't put it on a Bunsen burner. And that's what some people want to do in order to, say, well, if you can't prove it scientifically, it doesn't happen. Well, a lot of things happen in our society and in our world that don't fit in the test tube and don't fit in under a Bunsen burner. They have a life review. A life review is a examination of their total life. And basically it goes by very quickly, and it's non-judgmental. They judge themselves. And basically they're told that, basically I read one the other night about Mohammed was his name. He was, I guess he belonged to the Muhammad faith or the... Muslim faith, thank you. Thank you. And he was talking about he had a life review. And his life was everything passed before him. And he was judged. He had to judge himself. And he said he came to a part where he had to go get some water in his life. And he was down getting this water up, and he brought the bucket back, and the bucket got heavy. And he said, rather than dump it out on the ground, he said he looked over here, and he saw a little tree. And the tree was very arid, and it needed water. So he took the water over and poured some on this little tree. And he said when he went to his life review, he said the angels and the spirits, whoever was with him going through this, said that this was one of the most remarkable things that he came. He said it was one of the best things that happened to him in his life, watering a little tree. But that's kind of how God works. It's nothing big. It's very simple things. They're little things that make it seem. They talk of beautiful scenery. And as we've seen before, they really can't describe it because we don't have words to describe it. They can't describe it. They talk about these experiences as being unable to put in human language. They just can't describe the colors, the beauty, the peace, the tranquility that they have. They hear music. Dr. Eben Alexander, who's a neurologist, also a surgeon, who had a really in-depth near-death experience, is trying to recreate the music he heard, which I doubt if he'll ever do. But he in his conferences or talks will try to redo this. They all go to a border. And the border is no trespassing. And they either say they want to stay, or most of the time they hear the word, it's not your time. You have to go back. I don't want to go back. Well, sorry, it's not your time. And so they are given this instruction. You have to go back because you got to do something. You have something very important for you to do. And so most of them reluctantly will go back. I'll show you a few tonight on videos that these people are very upset they came back, because they're in the life here and they're suffering and they're having a hard time. And they were in complete, if you can ever imagine, complete peace and tranquility. and love, being loved, feel like they're really loved and experience this love that they experience. So this is it. So how do we verify this? How do we verify this, that these people are honest? And you have to look at people. Barbara and I have gone to IADS conferences where people from all over the country come, and you can pretty much tell when they're embellishing their near-death experience. People that are really honest and sincere about it, you'll see tonight, they're not there to embellish. They're there to share their experience with you because they feel this is very, very important, that you share in this experience and that you hear the message that they're bringing back, and it's a very simple message that they're bringing back. And so that's what we look at. So basically what we do is called veridical perception in near-death experiences. And veridical perception is when a person is having a near-death experience and they acquire verifiable information which they could not have obtained otherwise. And that's like a person who would have an out-of-body experience that would look down on their resuscitation and see something happening, and they're able to verify that when they are resuscitated. And they're able to tell the medical crew what happened. And many times they're ridiculed. That didn't happen to you. You're dreaming. Probably the drugs you were on, probably the anesthesia we put you under. But the veridical experience is a very powerful source of information, and there's no way they could obtain this. No way they could obtain this information. It's because it's a subjective experience that they're going through, and they're able to validate things that are happening to them in this objective reality here. And so this objective reality is added to it. So, and they're sometimes related to the doctors, the nurses, and the hospital personnel, relatives and family of the experiencer. They hear these stories. This happened to me, that happened to me. And even family will say, we need to get you a psychiatrist. We need to get you examined because there's something wrong with you. Because people can't believe that they're having this type of thing. I'll tell you about the blue. I'm going to show you tonight some veridical experiences that happen. And these are landmark cases. The blue tennis shoe, if you Google that, Kimberly Clark out in Washington State had a near-death experience herself. And she was a social worker and worked in the hospital at Barbara. And I went to the hospital, huge hospital out in Washington State. And she was taking a worker, people who work in the fields and pulling fruit out in California. She had a heart attack and she was brought to the hospital. And they revived her, brought her back. And Maria went by to see her. And I had met Maria, and I asked her about this case, which I'll share with you. And she said that the lady told her that, she was doing better, and then boom, she went into another cardiac arrest and came out of it. And Maria went in to see her, and she says, there's a blue tennis shoe out on the ledge of, I believe it's the third floor of this hospital. And the blue tennis shoe has a scrape on the side, and the lace is turned up under the tennis shoe. And Maria said, okay. It's very interesting. I'll see if I can find it. Kind of pushing it off. It's really not out there. And so Maria started working in the hospital, door to door. It's a huge hospital. And she came up to a floor and looked out the window, and guess what was there? A blue tennis shoe with a scrape on the side and the lace turned up under. Now, there's no way this lady who's in the hospital suffering from cardiac arrest could have seen this unless she was in an out-of-body experience. She was in the bed. And she said that she had an out-of-body experience. She floated up, went outside the hospital, saw this tennis shoe, and then came back and rejoined her body. They resuscitated her. How do we know that? Well, that's a veridical experience. She had the tennis shoe. She found it. I asked Kimberly, I said, Kimberly, when you looked out that window and you saw that tennis shoe, what did you do? She said, my head hit the window. Said, I couldn't believe it. And she said, I just almost fainted. And so she got the tennis shoe and brought it back. There's another famous case of a man in the Netherlands. And there are a number of these. I'm giving you some. There's a whole book written on these veridical experiences that people go through. This was in the Netherlands. A fellow was found in the woods, and he was suffering from exposure and everything else. They put him in an ambulance, tried to resuscitate him going back to the hospital, and were able to do so. They got him going a little bit, and then they got to the hospital, and he went into another cardiac arrest. And so they began working on him. And one of the nurses, when they opened his mouth to put a tube down, noticed he had dentures. So he took the dentures out, put them in the crash cart, closed the door, and left them there. And so they tried to work, and finally got him resuscitated. It took them a while, but they finally got him breathing, had blood flowing enough so that they were able to put him in the intensive care unit. And he stayed in intensive care probably a week, getting better, and didn't have any failures after that. And then after a week or so, he was back on one of the wards, and he saw this nurse that he said, "Say, you know where my dentures are?" And the nurse said, "How do I know where your dentures are?" He said, "Well, I saw you. When I came in, I saw you. I was up in the ceiling. I saw you working on me. I heard everything you and the nurses were saying. You said you didn't think you were going to make me survive. You didn't think I had a chance." And he said, "Well, that's true." And he said, "These were the nurses that were with you." And he said, "You took my dentures out and you put them in a crash cart." And he says, "I can still hear the rattling of the bottles." And sure enough, they went down the crash cart. You know what was in there? His teeth. So he got his teeth back, and he lived happily ever after. But that's a true story. That's analytical. Bruce Grayson, who works for the University of Virginia, he's a neurologist also, very involved with IANs, tells a story of he's been doing this for about 30, 40 years. And he's at the University of Virginia. He's had all kind of cases, talked to all kind of people, worked in all kind of situations. And he relates this story of a technical writer who was hospitalized with pneumonia. And he had repeated respiratory attacks, which would cause him to stop breathing. And so he was in the hospital, and at the time he was under the care of a particular nurse, 21-year-old lady, who he became very fond of. And one day she told him that she was going to be taking a long vacation, long weekend, and go on a vacation. And so he wished her well, said goodbye, and shortly after she left, the next day, he had a respiratory arrest, and his lungs stopped working. So he went into cardiac arrest. And so they were working hard to revive him. And they finally got him revived, and in this near-death experience, he found himself in a pastoral scene, a very beautiful pastoral scene. He was very comfortable, very at peace, and that's what they'll tell you. It's a very peaceful existence. And then he saw the nurse, this nurse that had taken care of him in the hospital, this 21-year-old lady. And he saw Anita, as her name, was walking towards him. Now he's in another world now. And he was startled because as far as she could tell, she was fine. She was doing just fine. She was totally healthy. And he said to her, "Anita, what are you doing here?" And she said, "This is where I am. Now you need to go back, and I want you to tell my parents that I love them very much. And I'm sorry I wrecked the red MGB." And she had turned and walked away. And when he was resuscitated, he got back, he told one of the nurses, and she ran out of the room crying. And the nurse he saw, he told about this event, and she left the room. It turned out that his favorite nurse, Anita, had taken the long weekend off because it was her 21st birthday, and her parents had flown her to surprise her with a gift, which was a red MGB. And she was taken, they jumped in the car, took off down the hill, lost control, hit a telephone pole, and it was all over. She was dead. Now, there's no way he knew she was dead. He was in cardiac arrest. So how she died, the details of how she died, became clear to him. So I don't have any way, he says, Dr. Grayson, of explaining this unless you assume that somehow this nurse, Anita, was still living in some form and able to communicate with him as a patient. So that's Dr. Rick Grayson, as far as he's concerned, is a very, very red MGB. So those are three, and we saw one with Pam Reynolds the other night. So this is what researchers call that was a veridical experience. He came back and shared what he had up there with somebody, and it was true. It was true, and they had verification that what he said was true. And so this is where if they can take these anecdotal details and make them real and say that they're real, and this is what happened to the person. Now, this is Dr. Lloyd Rudy. He's a famous cardiologist, and I want you to hear his story tonight. Very powerful.
Hi, I'm Dr. Mike Milligan. I'm here with Dr. Lloyd Rudy, one of the most famous cardiac surgeons. Dr. Rudy, thanks so much for being with us.
You're welcome.
You know, we don't get the opportunity to be in the operating room, or even most people don't get the opportunity to visit with a cardiac surgeon who has had experiences with people near death, or some who have already been pronounced dead and come back. And so that's what we're going to talk about here. In particular, one case, and we may touch on another. Dr. Rudy, why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
We had a very unfortunate individual who, on Christmas Day, had, from an oral infection, infected his native valve. If your native valve has the slightest defect, whether you were born with it or you developed it later, it calcified a little and the valve leaflets don't move or whatever, the body recognizes that as something abnormal that it's got to take care of.
Okay. And being a dentist, this is very intriguing to me.
Yeah, I mean, it even fits into our meeting there and so on.
Right.
So that's what happened to this man, and I happened to be off for the first Christmas in 5 years, and one of my junior partners was on call, and he had to do an emergency valve resection to try and get rid of the nidus of infection that was spreading all over into every organ of this man's body.
Right.
Once we were able to accomplish the repair of the aneurysm and the replacement of the valve, we could not get the person off of the bypass. Every time the 4 or 5 liters of blood that we were pumping around his body, we would reduce down to 2 or 3, he'd begin to weaken and his blood pressure would go down and so on. To make a long story short, we simply couldn't get him off the heart-lung machine.
Right.
Which happens in people whose hearts are severely compromised, multiple heart attacks and all. Well, finally we just had to give up. I mean, we just said, we cannot get him off of the heart-lung machine, so we're going to have to pronounce him dead. So we did that. And so the anesthesiologist turned his machine off, and the bellows that were breathing for the patient stopped. That machine was quiet. The anesthesiologist went into the surgeon's lounge. He hadn't eaten anything all day, so he went in to have a sandwich. The nurses, who were also starved and tired and stuff, left, and the people who usually clean up the instruments and all that were coming in and taking away all these tools and so on. And my surgical assistant, who also will never forget this case.
Well, how could you?
And has told people about it multiple times.
Right.
Closed the patient in a way that a post-mortem exam could be done, because anyone who succumbs on the table has to, by law, has to have an autopsy.
Right.
The machine that records the blood pressure and the pulse and the left atrial pressure and all the monitoring lines and things continued to run the paper out onto the floor in a big heap. Nobody bothered to turn it off. And then
What happened?
Yeah,
No, what mine is. Is yours?
I don't know why, unless. Stop it here, stop the recording.
Okay.
Let's see if I can get that sound. Now, try it again. What, no, it's not going.
Jack, your radio might have cut off.
Yes, this here.
Saw some red lights there a while ago.
Period. Let's see. It may be.
You do that, right. Well, the assistant surgeon and I went in and took our gowns off and gloves and masks and things and came back, and we were in our short sleeve shirts and we were standing at the door kind of discussing if there was anything else we could have done, any other medicines we could have given, whatever, to have made this a success. And as we were standing there, it had been at least 20 minutes. You know, I don't know this exact time sequence, but it was close to 20, 25 minutes that this man recorded no heartbeat, no blood pressure, and the echo showing no movement of the heart, just sitting. And all of a sudden we looked up, and the surgical assistant had just finished closing him. And we saw some electrical activity. And pretty soon the electrical activity turned into a heartbeat. Very slow, 30, 40 a minute. And we thought, well, that's kind of an agonal thing. And we see that occasionally, that the heart will continue to beat even though the patient can't generate a blood pressure or pump any blood. Well, pretty soon we look and he's actually generating a pressure. Now, we're not doing anything. I mean, the machines are all shut off and we're stopped all the medicines and all that. And so I start yelling, "Get anesthesia back in here and get the nurses." And we started giving him some medicines, and anesthesia started giving him oxygen, and pretty soon he had a blood pressure of 80, and pretty soon a blood pressure of 100, and his heart rate was now up to 100 a minute, you know, and his blood gases were fine. He was oxygenating his blood, and to make a long story short, he recovered and had no neurologic deficit. And for the next 10 days, 2 weeks, all of us went in and were talking to him about what he experienced, if anything. And he talked about the bright light at the end of the tunnel, as I recall, and so on. But the thing that astounded me was that he described that operating room floating around and saying, "I saw you and Dr. Cattaneo standing in the doorway with your arms folded talking. I didn't know where the anesthesiologist was, but he came running back in. And I saw all of these post-its sitting on this TV screen. And what those were any call I got, the nurse would write down who called and the phone number and stick it on the monitor, and then the next post-it would stick to that post-it, and then I'd have a string of post-its and phone calls I had to make. He described that. I mean, there's no way he could have described that before the operation because it didn't have any cold.
No.
Right?
And he's sitting on,
And
he's lying on the, so he must have been floating.
He was up there.
Yeah.
He described the scene, things that there is no way he knew. I mean, he didn't wake up in the operating room and see all this
No.
stuff. I mean, he was out.
Right.
And was out for, I don't know, even a day or two.
Right.
While we recovered him in the intensive care unit. So what does that tell you? What does that tell you? I mean, these people say you lose weight when you die. You lose weight, something leaves you and you lose weight. They actually weigh people who die or are on scales and they die and they lose weight and other things like that that people describe.
Right.
So was that his soul up there?
It's hard to know. But it certainly brings that possibility into play.
It always makes me very emotional.
Right.
There have been other instances, like one other I remember so vividly, was a guy who was on anticoagulation, medicines that keep you from clotting. And I don't even remember the operation or whatever, but we had to do him right away. And you try and reverse that as much as possible, but it's impossible to completely do it. And we were in there and we'd finished the surgery and we just simply could not stop this person from bleeding.
Right.
I mean, we pulled out every gun in the armory
Right.
to try and get this
Everything you can
person.
possibly do.
Yeah, and we finally decided we're not going to be able to stop this bleeding.
Right.
And all of a sudden, nobody spoke. Because everybody in that room felt a presence.
Right.
And, I mean, the anesthesiologist and I talked about it afterwards. I mean, there was no question. There was a presence in that room.
Right.
And he stopped bleeding just like that.
How do you explain that? You can't. What is your take on that, Dr. Rudy?
Oh. There's something out there that, you know, people with faith believe is there. Right?
It's there. Yeah.
So I don't. Some people call it God. Some people call it other things, Buddha or Muhammad or whoever. It has convinced me there is something out there.
Something out.
So what'd you think of that? You see, what happens, I think, for most of us, and I'm not on, am I? No, okay. I think what happens is that, I can't get this on, is what happens. Okay, is that it? You hear me? No? No, yes?
You're not on.
Yes, now, no? Did you hear me? Through the microphone? No microphone, yes.
Not through your mic.
But I think basically what happens is that we're not in that arena. These doctors are every day. These nurses that work in hospice care, they see this every day.
This one.
And this is something that we may have experienced or something that may be, and I tell you that every time, oh yes, is that it?
That's mine.
Okay. Okay. Last week we had this problem, and I apologize because that's why I've got two ladies up here putting this microphone around on me here. So anyhow, okay, I got this. Okay, bear with us. All right. So so basically that's what happens, I think, and I think that there are all kind of worlds out there. You know, there's the education world, there's the airplane world, there's the doctor's world, there's the nurse's world, there's real estate world, and these doctors and these nurses are in this world where this happens. Barbara and I have given this talk. It may not sound like it, but we've given it a few times. But basically, inevitably, we will come across people in the audience who have had these experiences. And they will tell us some mind-boggling things that happened to them as far as in their life and what happened to them. So this Dr. Rudy, as I say, is no longer living. He was a famous cardiologist, and he verified this very, very emphatically. I have no reason not to believe what he told us. And he has witnesses. I mean, those people that were there in the room saw this guy, and as I say, his body's on the table. And this other being, this spiritual being, is up floating around the roof looking down on what's happening, you know. A lot of people, I think, what's her name, Pam Reynolds said she didn't want to get back in the body. It didn't look too good. So she wanted to stay where she was. And so she didn't particularly care to jump back. And inevitably, most people that go back into their body have a very difficult time because it's kind of a very brutal effect when they go back in. People who've had automobile accidents, that we read last week, the young girl that was said she didn't want to get back in that body. It didn't look too good. But when she went back into it, it was a very traumatic thing. And that's pretty much how it happens. So Dr. Van Lommel, who is from the Netherlands, who's done a great deal of research on this near-death experience in Holland and the Netherlands over this way, works very effectively with Peter Fenwick, who Barbara mentioned in her end-of-life experiences, has done a study in cardiac arrest patients, and those who were revived, about 18% experienced near-death experience. The Gallup poll has determined that over the past 50 years, some 25 million people have experienced some type of NDE. Now, we listed a number of episodes that people would go through, and the deeper the near-death experience, the more episodes they will have. A lot of people will just have the bright light. They will see the bright light. They will go to the bright light. They'll come to the border, and they'll sit back home. I think I told you I had a lady in Murphy, North Carolina, who attempted suicide. She was talking to me about her near-death experience and said that she was going up a chute, basically. She had overdosed on something and heard the words, it's not your time. Go back. Boom, she went back. All she had was the light and the chute. She didn't have a life review, or she didn't see other relatives or other friends. But some people that have a deep near-death experience go through these episodes where they visit with their grandmother, their grandfather who's passed away, their parents who have passed away, whatever it might be, and they experience angels. Some of them do. Some of them come in contact with this supreme being who they don't know how to describe. And if we're Christians, as I say, culturally, most people would say that it's the good Lord, it's Jesus. If it was a Hindu, he'd say it was one of the Hindu gods. So basically, that's what happens. Dr. Moody, who is the guru on this, has determined that 1 in 30 people have had a near-death experience. And most of the time, they're not going to come up and talk to you. You know what happened to me a couple of weeks ago? They don't do that. They don't talk about it sometimes for years because it's traumatic. And they don't know how you're going to accept it. And they don't know exactly how to explain it because it's very profound and it's very, if you take yourself and you step from this world into another world, and that's essentially about what it is, and you try to explain that other world to somebody, it becomes very difficult for them to understand what you're saying. So this video here is a normal near-death experience. I've tried to show you the veridical experiences. And Dr. Rudy, Pam Reynolds, I've given you kind of a few of these near-death experiences that were veridical experience. Now, this is just a regular NDE that happened. And I want you to watch Emily here. Emily, this young lady here, she gets really excited about this. She says, this is really unbelievable.
A patient on the brink of death. He had no heart rate. He had no blood pressure. He had no pulse. And we think about that. Like something scripted in Hollywood, says intensive care unit nurse Emily Bishop. He was down for close to 45 minutes. During which time, he claims he traveled beyond this world and back.
Well, he was telling me that he loved me and that he'd seen the light and that he had seen my mom and my dad, and I lost it at that point in time because I just lost my mom.
The week after burying his mother-in-law, Brian Miller returned to work, delivering metal here in Streetsboro.
I was feeling fine. And then when I undid the tarp and pulled the tarp off, I started getting tightness.
Probably the cold air or asthma, he thought, until the intense pain started. Brian was having a massive heart attack. His main artery entirely blocked, known as the Widowmaker.
He was in obvious distress when we found him.
Streetsboro firefighters and paramedics put the hospital on alert.
Got to get real aggressive with our protocols and got to the hospital as soon as we could. Can be life or death.
Dr. William Wolf rushed Brian into surgery here at University Hospital's Ahuja Medical Center.
We want to open up the vessel as soon as possible.
Here's the blockage being cleared and blood flow restored.
Man, pain just started slowly going down.
They told him that he did good by getting here as soon as he did, coming quick.
Not only did Brian survive the heart attack and emergency surgery, he was already up and talking. He was doing fine until he suddenly wasn't.
I saw him across the screen. I ran in there.
Brian was experiencing a fatal arrhythmia called VFib, ventricular fibrillation.
Basically, his heart rate goes like this. And it's just this, scribble. And his heart is just kind of, quivering in there. There's no, it's not able to pump, it's not doing anything.
Emily called Code Blue.
CPR. Strong, hard, fast CPR.
A half a dozen nurses and doctors also responded.
Pushing a whole bunch of medications to basically restart his heart.
But at just 41, the husband and father of 3 was slipping away.
The only thing I remember is I started seeing the light and started walking towards the light.
While the ICU team tried to revive Brian, he claims he was walking along a heavenly path lined with flowers, then stopped by a familiar face.
She was the most beautiful thing when I seen her. It was like the first day I met her. And looked so happy.
His mother-in-law, Kay, who had just passed away.
She grabbed a hold of my arm and she told me, it's not your time. You don't need to be here. We need to take you back. You got things to go home and do.
And after what felt like 15 minutes,
her husband Jack was back there waving at me, giving me a smile. And she just telling me to go home and walked me back.
But at the hospital, time was running out. Or so everyone thought.
We shocked him 4 times. And on the 4th time, it still didn't work. And then, out of nowhere, he got his pulse back.
A normal heartbeat after nearly 45 minutes.
It's pretty awesome to see.
Even more incredible was Brian's condition.
So if you think about that, his brain had no oxygen for 45 minutes. So the fact that he is up, walking, talking, laughing, everything, that's amazing.
As is Brian's memory of the white light.
And I just totally broke down. And I went and sat down because I totally lost it when he told me that.
But Brian says there's no reason to feel sad. The experience has changed his entire outlook on life and death.
There is an afterlife and people need to believe in it big time.
He says he's eternally grateful to the medical staff and his mother-in-law for this second chance.
I need to be here a lot more longer. I got 3 wonderful daughters and a wife.
And in the end, he says, that's all that really matters.
Love, very much love.
In Beechwood, Suzanne Stratford, Fox 8 News.
So there was not much embellishment in that one. He had a heart attack. He was suffering. He was dying. He was dead, basically. He was not able to revive him. He came back, and that's just on TV. And I think one of the most amazing things is the nurse that was there at the time, how excited she was about this, how enthusiastic she was about these things that were taking place in this guy. And so this was just kind of a normal. These are the ones that don't give you veridical experiences, that don't tell you, that are not able to come back and say, this happened to me. His happened to him, but he just related it. He wasn't able to, to prove anything. He just anecdotally told them that he saw his mother-in-law and his father-in-law, and that his father-in-law was back there waving to him, saying, get on back to earth, bye-bye. And that's essentially what he did. So these are amazing things. These things that happen, as I say, it's not like 300 or 400 or 500 people. I mean, we're talking millions. And it's becoming more and more prominent today as we see, and because this is something that people are beginning to talk about. 10, 15 years ago, you wouldn't hear much about it, because, as I say, many people who go through these are frightened. They don't know what to say. They don't have words to explain it, and so basically they just don't talk about it. And if you read some of these things on YouTube or an article, and if you look up in near-death experiences and read an article on it, then start reading the threads that follow it, it's quite interesting how many people will say, you know, I had the same experience 40 years ago, and I didn't tell anybody. Or this happened to me 10 years ago, and I didn't tell anybody. Because people are afraid, and this is it. This is Mary Neal up here. She's an orthopedic surgeon. I want to share her with you. She's a beautiful woman, has 4 children. She was told in her death experiences a very tragic thing. She was told that she had 4 children. She said her oldest boy was going to be killed in an automobile accident, which he was. And she had to live through that. But she's a very powerful lady. I've had the chance to meet her, talk with her, and just very sincere. She was in Brazil. She's a kayak person and was drowned in Brazil. And she'll tell you her story as Miss Kelly interviews her.
And now to an incredible story of survival. A well-respected surgeon kayaking in a remote South American river drowns. 15 minutes underwater after a horrific accident pins her to the bottom of a river. No air and no way out. Amazingly, Dr. Mary Neal did manage to make it out alive after she was rescued. But she says she had a glimpse of the afterlife that she calls one of the greatest gifts she's ever received while she was struggling under that water. Author of the book, To Heaven and Back, Dr. Mary Neal joins me now. She's an orthopedic spinal surgeon. Dr. Neal, thank you so much for being here. I want to start with this. Prior to this incident, were you a religious person?
I would say I was pretty typical in that I was raised in a church on Sunday mornings, and I did take my own children to Sunday school, but I think it was typical that I never incorporated spirituality into my daily life. And
Did you have a thought about an afterlife or a heaven prior to this, one way or the other?
I'm not sure I really spent the time to think about it. I had 4 young children and a full-time job and a husband, and life gets in the way of thinking about spiritual things usually.
So you're out in this horrific accident, you find yourself under a waterfall kayaking, and you get
It wasn't horrific, it was wonderful.
Right. It starts off kind of horrific though. And take us through it. What happens to you as you find yourself submerged underwater?
Well, I was submerged, and the force of the water had me absolutely pinned to the front deck of the boat, and so I was not able to push myself out of the boat or pull the spray skirt off and exit the boat. And I tried a number of times before it became clear that I wasn't going to be able to exit the boat on my own, and I was far enough away from the shore of the river that I didn't think anyone was going to be pulling me out. And at that time, I gave my life over to God and truly and sincerely asked that God's will be done. And at that moment, everything changed. I was very calm and peaceful and felt great. And I had this very physical sense of being held and comforted and reassured that everything would be fine. My husband and my children would be fine, regardless of whether I lived or died.
This is while you're under the water with no air, you can't breathe, you're completely submerged. Do you believe you were dying?
Yes. I continued to do self-assessment exams, and I knew I couldn't breathe, but for me it was a very seamless transition. I had never wanted to drown. I had always been afraid of drowning, even though I'm a water person. And for me, one of the remarkable things is that I never felt panic. I never felt afraid. I was really very calm and continually reassured, even though I knew that I had no air and I knew that I was dying.
You say you felt you rose up and out of the river, and when my soul broke through the surface of the water, I encountered a group of 15 or 20 souls who greeted me with the most overwhelming joy I have ever experienced. Tell us about that.
It was fantastic. These were people, spirits, souls, I'm not quite sure what to call them. All the words sound a little goofy. But they embraced me and were so filled with love and joy. And they were people that I had known for an eternity. And they had known me for an eternity. And we were so happy to see each other. And they were clearly there to help me go down this path and protect me. And it was wonderful. They were exploding with God's love and grace, and they took me down this path that was so beautiful that I have really no words to describe it. And time and space had a different sense, and so I could rejoice with them. Simultaneously, I could look back at the riverbank and see my body being pulled to the shore and seeing CPR being started. And I looked back on my body and sort of felt fondly toward it and thought, gee, you served me well. And it was then that I truly realized that I must actually be dead.
Wow. Do you, as a doctor, have a medical explanation for any of that?
Where medicine ends, God begins. That's the real answer. Because this was not a dream or a hallucination, and it wasn't the result of a dying brain. This was more real than anything we experience here on earth.
And now, having been through it, do you have any fear of your own death?
Oh, absolutely not. I wouldn't hasten it, but I am looking forward to going back when it's the right time.
Wow.
I have no fear.
Dr. Mary Neal, it's an incredible story, and we're so grateful that you came on to share it with us. I do want to ask you before I let you go quickly. You say one of the questions that you feel you can answer in the book is why did bad things happen to good people? Can you leave us with your thoughts on that?
I would tell you that there's no such thing as something that's bad. As one very quick example, you called this a horrific accident. I look at it with incredible gratitude and joy. And we may not understand how a quote bad thing transitions into a beautiful thing, but I think when you truly have trust that that beauty exists, we can look, and it's unfortunately always retrospectively, but we can almost always look back at something and see all of the incredibly positive and beautiful things that have come out of something that would originally be called tragic.
Yeah.
Even going back as far as the death of Christ. I mean, we celebrate it.
I'm going to leave it at that. Dr. Neal, thank you so much. The book is called To Heaven and Back, and we'll be right back.
That's a pretty powerful story. She's a great woman and really doesn't embellish anything. She went through this, and some miraculous things happened, and she had to pay this price for her son, which she said that good comes out of bad, and so that's how she looks at it. It's all, I guess, how we perceive things, how we look at them, and one of the worst things we can have is the loss of a child. But she made it through it, and she experienced this near-death experience, and again, as I say, it's a very difficult thing, but it changes people. It has a whole tremendous change on people that experience this, and we're going to look at some of those this evening. 7:30, let's take about a 5-7 minute break, and then we'll come back and finish up by 8 o'clock. Thank you.
these were the last two, so. So this lady, they told her that her son was gonna die in a car crash?
Yeah, that he would die young. She didn't know how he would die, but they told her that he would die young. And so she never really knew exactly when he was going to die, but she just knew that he was not going to live to be into adulthood. So. But she's coped with everything, you know. She just is so.
Well, she's seen the light, so to speak, you know.
Makes a difference.
Yeah.
It does.
Wow. Okay.
There's a few. I don't have to do anything. Yep. If anybody has any questions, too, think about it. And as soon as we start back in about 2 or 3 more minutes, you can ask any questions that you have. He just flashed Dr. Moody up there, and I wanted to. He just flashed Dr. Moody up there, and I wanted you to look at it. See if you see the resemblance. Whoops. Can you flash Dr. Moody up there again? Can you flash Dr. Moody?
It's the head. It's the shiny.
No, it's a smile, too.
Big ears.
Okay. Let's get going again. Let's get going again. No, I said let's get going.
He said he was supposed to be here, but he got home late. He says, I see you sitting up front. I said, yeah, I was folding laundry and I come, Mom was sitting up front. I sat 3 rows back, but she didn't move, so I had to move up front. So he's watching it.
Yeah, Lou is, My wife says it's time to start, so it's time to start. English teacher, and I have to do what she says. Well, do we have any questions on the videos you've seen or anything? Yes, John. Yes, Dr. Neal.
She found out that her son was going to be killed in a car accident?
Yes.
She didn't find out that he was going to, oops.
Uh-oh.
I don't think she knew how he was going to die.
Maybe not, yeah.
She just knew that he was not going to live to be an adult. And so she knew that he was going to die young, but how, she didn't really know.
Yeah, I think that she was told that, you know, in this meeting, in this time of this death that she was going through, that this is one of the things she would experience in her life. And as she said, there's no such thing as time in these. They seem that people will tell you that it lasted for 2 or 3 hours, and it may have been a minute. So there's no time, and all communication, as we've learned, is not verbal communication. It's all telepathic. They know immediately what's going on and what's happening. So it's a telepathic communication that people have with one another in this realm. But I think as a Christian and as a Catholic, there's no two ways about it that we have a dual system, so to speak, that we're not a monotheistic who says that we're just one, we're all physical, that type of thing. But we know that as a Christian that we have a spiritual part to us as well as a physical part to us. And that basically once that physical part dies, that spiritual part will live on forever. And I think this is what we're seeing. I found it very difficult when I went to the IANS conference out in Washington because they were talking about consciousness and what happens to it, where does it go? And I'm thinking, this is the soul. That's all you got to say. It's the soul. But there's people that can't wrap their minds around this. And so they talk about consciousness, and they talk about consciousness living or dying or whatever. And this is one of the things that, if you noticed in these near-death experiences, that the truck driver that we just saw, he was out. He was out for, 20, 30 minutes, and he had no brain damage. Once oxygen stops going to the brain, then basically we're suffering from, there's going to be some damage. Going to be some damage to it. And of course, some people have tremendous brain damage, and Barbara brought this up in her talk on end-of-life experiences. It's called the Lazarus effect, where people will be in a coma for months, and their brain is completely gone. There's nothing there. There's no physical element to consciousness. And all of a sudden, they sit up in bed and start talking to their family, just like it was yesterday. And there are probably 50, 60, 70 cases like this in the medical journals that people have this Lazarus effect. And then they'll sit back down and boom, they're gone. They're gone. And what is it that returns? Is it their mind? Is it their brain? Well, we don't know. I mean, this is something we cannot, it's still, the jury's still out on most of this stuff that we're talking about, unless you have a spiritual element like I think Dr. Rudy said, if you have faith and you know this, and this is what this is all about, what this near-death experience is all about, is to lessen your fear of dying. All of us are going to die. We don't know when, we don't know how. But inevitably, we're going to, yes, sir. Do you have to have your heart stopped? Is that what you're asking? In most cardiac arrest, there's nothing. It's what they call flatline. All the machines show no activity. Now you can, and this is what we've learned within the past 20 years, is that you can resuscitate a person. You can, through CPR, bring them back through this, because as Dr. Parnia says, death is it's a process. We don't die and that's it. Everything's over. It's a slow process. The brains in your cells start dying slowly. Other cells start dying. And then eventually you're completely dead, everything. The only true sign you have of death that I've been told is what's called rigor mortis. That's the only time. If you ask the person, well, when does the soul come into the body? I don't know. When does the soul leave the body? I don't know. You know at rigor mortis, there's nothing there, And so basically that's it. But in a cardiac arrest, you have no breathing, you have no pulse, and you have, they sometimes do what they call the gag effect, which some doctors have to do. They stick something down your throat to see if you get a reaction to that, which means that you still have life in you. And if that takes place, then they continue to work. You had something to...
Well, it sounded like you were asking if someone's brain is dead but their heart is still beating, could they have a near-death experience?
It's a good question. Yeah, I don't know if I have the answer to that.
Eben Alexander was a neurosurgeon, and he had a brain disease which literally ate away at his brain. And he was on life support. They kept his heart beating, of course, that whole time. And he had a near-death experience, a very, very profound one.
Very profound, yeah.
Very profound one. And, you know, when he talks about it, and you can tell that he doesn't understand it. He himself is a neurosurgeon, and he knows what kind of a brain problem that he had, and knows that the disease that he had was actually eating away at his brain, so he should never have been able to come back fully, because his brain wasn't even whole, and yet he did. And his name is E-B-A-N.
E-B-E-N.
Like
Eben.
Like Eben with a B, Eben Alexander. And I think we have, in the bibliography, we have his book. So if you're interested in reading about that, but yes, his brain was gone, his heart was still beating, and he had this experience.
Yeah. And I think the big thing is the results of these, what happens to people, the message they bring back, the fact that they have these near-death experiences, they transmit into another world. I mean, and they can't explain it, as I say, and it's a very difficult thing for them to even admit it, because people will, even the parents would say that, no, we need to, you didn't have this, it didn't happen to you. Because it's so, well, you've seen tonight just the hard to believe aspects of this. But you have to understand, if you believe basically that we are all physical and that our consciousness is in our brain, and when we die, our brain dies, so consciousness dies. So we can't have consciousness exist somewhere else. And yet it does. These people are telling us that. And to us who are Christians would say, well, this is a human soul. This is a soul that man has, the spiritual part of him, that transmits into the other life. And so it's got to be something other than the body that's here, from this on the resuscitation table, or the table that people are working on the person, and there's another object up here looking down on it. What is that object? Father Spitzer, who is the president of Gonzaga University out in Washington State, spends a lot of time on this. He's very into near-death experiences, and has a tremendous concept on what is this thing up here. What is it? How do we define it? It has no limits on where it can go. It can go anywhere it wants to go. It sees, it hears, and the body down here is doing nothing but suffering, or it's gone. It's typically, and that's what people worry about, as far as when if you're deprived of oxygen, your brain is going to be damaged, and you're going to come back with damage, and it will affect your life. But these people, I think this guy was out 20 minutes. Mary Neal was out quite a while. They had no brain damage. That's very unusual, very, very unusual. And anytime you deprive the brain of oxygen, it's going to suffer. It's going to be damaged. And yet these people don't experience this damage. And so and I think the whole concept that Barbara and I want to get across basically is to share these experiences with you, and you have to judge yourself whether you believe them or not, whether you think they're embellished, whether you think this really happened, whether you believe Dr. Rudy, whether you believe the nurse in the hospital, and whether all these things are happening, or your own point of view. As I mentioned to you earlier, your belief system is going to take you where you want to go and what you want to believe in this. And as I say, we've researched this for the past 10 years, and we're still struggling. It's becoming more aware to us and more wonderful to us. But the key thing is what people bring back and tell us. that is what we have to do. You know, we have a purpose to be here. We have a purpose in life. That's one of the big things they tell us. One of the big things they say is we have to love. We have to love. That's not a difficult, it's a very difficult thing to do, but that's what they say. Love, it's all about love. If anytime you talk to NDE people, they'll tell you if they've been there that the message is love. We've got to learn to love. Yes, sir.
Does it also happen not only in the Christian community, but the Muslim community, the Hindu community, all the other religious followings?
It does. It does too. I mean, it doesn't. It does as most of them will tell you. As I say, most of them become more spiritual, as we'll see up here, than religious. And what would be the difference in a person becoming more spiritual than more religious? You have any idea? What is religion?
It's an organization.
A bunch of rules, right? Yeah, a bunch of rules. And so they do away with the rules and become very spiritual. That this transition that they've gone through makes them deeper spiritually. And they have the communication with God and with their spirits, whatever it might be, in a spiritual way. And they will tell you that there's really no, and I probably hope Father Paul's not watching this, but anyway, that there's no one church. I mean, there are many, all the churches are there to bring us to this place. And that's essentially what we have a wonderful vehicle, the Catholic Church. We do. And that's the vehicle that we use to get to know God better and to love Him better and to experience our...
But that's what all religions are. They're the vehicle by which you express your spirituality and you learn. I mean, it's a path that will lead you to God, and that's what it's all about, getting there, getting to God. And the spirituality, that's you trying to unite yourself to God, and your religion is supposed to help you do that.
Yeah.
If it doesn't, change it.
Yeah. But I think basically that's very important. And atheists have these. An atheist says, well, I think I might have missed the one Sam Parnia was talking about, but he was talking about an atheist who had a near-death experience. And what did he see? He said, well, I don't believe in God, but I saw this being, and I don't know who he was or what he was, but I saw him. And so atheists, all kind of people have had this. People from India, China, I mean, all over the world, Africa, China, everywhere. That's what it is. It's so universal. And this is what Dr. Moody found out, that it was universal, but there was so much likeness all over the world. Everything was very similar. People saw the gate. People went up the stairs. People saw the bright light, every one of them. And so they've identified, as I say, the ones that I showed you tonight, about 8 or 10 experiences that people have. And these are the most prominent ones. Some have all of them. Some have 2 of them. Some will have 5 of them. But they will experience this out-of-body or this transition. And then a lot of people say, well, these are hallucinations, or it's the drugs you've been taking. We'll get into that, I think, probably next week, but it's been disproven. The hallucinations are much different than what these people are experiencing. The hallucinations are really all jumbled. And these people are very logical in what they tell you, how they tell you, what they experience, and so forth. And so we'll go, and these people that have done these studies are really on the ball with what they've come up with. So Dr. Moody claims that he's yet to meet. Are there any more questions, by the way? I'm sorry. Any other? That's a good question, though. Yes, ma'am.
Are there people who have negative experiences?
Yes, there are. And we'll talk about that probably the last class. Yeah, they're horrific ones. There are not many, but some people do have bad experiences, and they see devils, they see bad things, and things happen to them. And we found out that mostly if people will say, "Oh my, help me, God," that they'll move into another realm. But those who have don't want to change, that it's a pretty bad experience, and it's a frightening experience. Yes, but there are bad as you would call them, bad near-death experiences that do happen. But I think the key is for us to try to understand that most people are very honest in this, and they're telling, as I say, the millions of people that are having them. They're all over the world, and it's getting hard to deny this as the medical profession is seeing. Dr. Grayson, who I mentioned works out of the University of Virginia, was saying that back in the 70s or 80s, he mentioned this in a group of physicians or doctors at a conference, and everybody would just kind of be quiet. But he says today when he goes to these conferences and begins talking about the experiences that he's had with patients with near-death experiences, he said that many doctors now are putting up their hands and said, well, let me tell you about the one that happened to me, just like Dr. Rudy did. We don't see all these things happening, but these happen. And when he comes out of the surgery, he's not going to know how to explain that. That's a very difficult thing to explain, what he went through, And it's quite amazing that these things do happen so fast. So it's particularly true with respect to ND experiences. They tend to exert a very powerful effect on the person that has these near-death experiences in this other world. And one chooses to interpret, however you choose to interpret it, they're unquestionably real in their effects. Dr. Jeffrey Long, he has I mentioned to you, he has a website, near-death experience research, and he has, I say, about 5,000, maybe 6,000 near-death experiences, and he rates every one of them. It's not just a superficial cover. He goes into depth with these near-death experiences, and they come from all over the world. They're translated in all kinds of languages, probably 15 or 20 languages. But he has done a research on, he questioned 1,120 people who had near-death experiences and asked them, how real was this? And I think it was 940 people said it was very, very real. It was not something that was artificial. I think probably 4 or 5 said it might have been real, and 3 said probably it was real. So a majority of people that go through this experience it as a very real experience, not as a hallucination, not as drugs, and we'll look at this. So they're real in their effects and what they do to people. So experience resume life, but living it more fully, loving more openly, and as I say, that's the huge message that these people bring back, that love is the most important thing. Love of ourselves, love of God, and love of our neighbor. That's the whole concept, and you can't beat that because you know what? You know where you find that? Find that in the scriptures. Very same thing. Love, love, love. I have 2 commandments. Love God and love your neighbor how? As yourself. As yourself. And we forget that sometimes because a lot of us have a hard time with ourselves. And so we have our image we have to build up, and we're very important people. And I think we have to realize that
we have a purpose.
Every one of us is unique.
We have a purpose.
We have a purpose. Yes, we have a purpose for being here. So it's the most awesome experience they've ever had. That's what Mary Neal said. I wouldn't take anything in the world for it. And I have another video here we'll probably get to next week. Is the guy's telling that he never wanted to come back. He wanted to stay over there. It was just too awesome. But he had to come back. And generally people have to come back with the voice that they hear, the experience they have with the person that's leading them there, that you have something to do. Every one of us is here for a reason. I think that's what we have to understand, and we have to find out why we're here, why we have to do this. They remember it for years. It's not something like a hallucination or a dream you have. I had a dream last night. What was it? I said, I don't remember. We wake up in the morning, we don't remember what the dream had. But Dr. Grayson also did a study with these people that he interviewed on their near-death experience, and they take this all down, they record it. Again, it's anecdotal. They have nobody that's saying, oh, yes, this happened from heaven, or a spirit telling him this is true. And he found out that 20 years later, he went back and interviewed the same people, and word for word, they expressed their whole idea of their near-death experience. Not changed at all. Very same thing. And we've experienced that with Mary Neal. We've been to a couple of conferences. Word for word, she pretty much tells the same story every time. It's not like this happened this time and this happened that time. It's all the same, and that's what Dr. Grayson found. They do a lot of research in this. People return change in many ways, so that's the key there. They have no fear of death, and that's what we want to impress upon you, that maybe if we can lessen your fear of death, because as I say, we're all going to die. There's nobody that's ever come back except one that I know of, and they've come back, but we're all going to die, and we just don't know when we're going to die. We don't know how we're going to die. And most people have a tremendous fear of death. It's one of the top 10 fears that people experience in their life, is I'm afraid to die, I'm afraid of the bugs, I'm afraid of the snakes, I'm afraid of the airplanes, whatever. But fear of death ranks up there among the top. And I think these people, as you've heard, every one of them that has had this has said, you don't have to fear. You don't have to be afraid. You don't have to be afraid, you know. I think a lot of people fear the pain that they may go through or whatever it might be. But the whole act of dying, I think, is basically, as people say, it's very peaceful. Boom. You're stepping into another world and so forth. And that's what they're telling us. That's the message we're trying to bring here. And they have a renewed sense of purpose in their lives. I think that we all look for, why are we here? What is my purpose for being here? What are my talents? And I think we really have to really work on that to find out what is our purpose here. What are we doing here? The first purpose is we have to love. Boom. That's it. Realize that love is the basic reason we're here, and feel that we're surrounded by a universal love. I think that you'll find out that as we go through, and Mary Neal has this in her sayings, that each of us is loved in a very specific way. That every one of us, that we are loved uniquely by the Supreme Being. That's what they bring back, and that's how they feel. They feel a very special, unique love, as they say, that someone's wrapping their arms around them, and that they're very special. They return and understand that death is not the end, that this will continue on. And you'll continue to learn. You'll continue to experience things in this other world that is very positive. And I think that we have to understand that, for the most part, they speak of love, knowledge, and purpose in life. And I think this is very, very important. Your purpose in life. Why are you here? We're all here for a reason. And I think that's one of the things that these people look for, and try to understand that they've experienced this love, and they can't explain the love that they've experienced. It's a love that basically is, what is the word I'm looking for?
Unconditional.
Huh? Unconditional. Thank you, ma'am. My English teacher. Unconditional love. And that's it. There's no conditions to it. Regardless of what we do, regardless of who we are, regardless of where we've been, regardless of where we're going, that love is there. And we have to understand this. And I think we have to understand that we're very unique. There's nobody in this room that's alike. There are 350 million people in our country, and there are no two alike. Everyone has a different fingerprint. Everyone has a different DNA. Everyone has a different personality. Everyone has a different voice. And that because of that, that's what makes you unique. That's what makes us all unique. And because we are unique, we have a purpose. They were put here because of that uniqueness, and that purpose is something that will help us to realize that this is why we're here. We have a special need in our life, and that we're very unique, and that we're created very unique. There's finish up with this story of Forest Lawn Cemetery in Glendale, California. And they have captured all of these reproductions of famous artworks. And one of the main things that they have put together in this cemetery is the works of Michelangelo. He's one of the greatest artists that have ever lived. He painted the Sistine Chapel. He did the Moses. And his famous statue is a Pietà. The Pietà in Rome. It's in Rome, Italy. And when I was over there many years ago, I had to take a coin and put it in. A light came on. I could take a picture of the Pietà, and then the light went out. But that's how they made their money. But anyway, and somebody tried to destroy it, so they got it in a special place now. I don't know where exactly it is. But Michelangelo did this great work on this, and it's it's considered probably the most beautiful masterpiece in the world. And in Forest Lawn Cemetery, they have duplicated this statue of the Ph.D. One of the great things about the Ph.D. is how do you get a 6'1" man over the lap of a 5' woman, which is very, very difficult. So that took a great deal of skill for Michelangelo. But he did this, and it's beautiful. It's a beautiful piece of work. And so in the Forest Lawn, they have duplicated this statue by machinery to the nth degree. And they even went and used the same marble that Michelangelo used, which is in Carrara, Italy. Carrara marble, beautiful white marble. But if you put the two side by side, you can tell the difference right away. The one that the master did is basically so different than the one that was created by machinery, even though to the nth degree. And that's how we are. Each one of us is very unique, and we have to tell ourselves that and not be ashamed to tell ourselves that we have a purpose here, we have a life here, and that purpose is to try to find out where we're supposed to go. Number one thing is to love one another and to love ourselves. Be glad with who we are and the gifts we have. And I'm going to quit with that because it's 2 minutes after 8, and I will hear from my instructor here that I've gone over tonight. Thank you all for being here. Do you have any questions? Any questions before we go? Yes, sir.
What have all my Lord read on near-death studies? People experience going through some kind of a tunnel process towards a light.
Correct.
They never reach it. But has anybody attempted to identify that?
Yes, some people do reach this light. They go up to this light, and this light gets very bright. Yeah. And there's a barrier. There's always a barrier that they can't cross over. Because once they cross over, they're into this other realm. But this barrier that is there, they're told that, that you have to go back. But some people come into this light, and they often say that it's brighter than the sun, but it doesn't hurt your eyes.
Mary Neal talks about being enveloped in the light when she was dying. And so I think that the light isn't always up there ahead of them. Just depends on how deep you are into death, I guess, really. How dead you are. Yeah.
How dead you are. Yeah.
How dead you are. Yeah. And then, and I mean, if you're like Mary Neal, truly, really dead, she was immediately enveloped in that love and the light. And then her experience went on from there because it was revealed to her that her son would die before he reached adulthood. And so, and others have had some small revelations like that.
Well, that always seems to be the purpose of this journey, is to go towards the light.
Right. Yeah, some people even talk about the light literally drawing them in, that they feel almost in a magnetic pull toward the light. I think Pam Reynolds talked about
being
the
pulled
light,
into the light, yeah.
like that it had a magnetic kind of a feel to it, that she was really being sucked into the light.
Another thing I've read of all the studies I've done, I've never ran into one where people feared what they've gone through. It was all a joyous, happy feeling. There was no fear of meeting some negative form.
Yeah, I think the ones that primarily, I mean, who's going to share, I went to hell, and, and the demons grabbed me and tore my flesh off me, kind of, that kind of, people are not going to be real excited about sharing that, but they're much more likely to share an experience that was, but I have been a few people who have shared.
Yeah, there are some
bad experiences.
Bad NDEs they talk about, but they're the minority. Most people have a very pleasant experience, and that's the love that they experience. And the ones that we've read that are negative near-death experiences, as I mentioned earlier, if there's some type of reform or an atheist who said, oh my God, I believe in God or whatever, they're generally brought back to this more positive near-death experience. And they may experience some negativism in it, but for the most part, it changes them pretty quickly.
And those who do come back from that really negative experience, at some point, they have called on God. Just whatever it was in them that made them call out to God, and that changed everything almost instantly.
Everything changed, yeah. Well, y'all have been great. Thank you for coming tonight, for being out here with us. And we hope you've learned a little something. And, yep. Thank you.